So, if you want to know who is actually winning the AI war right now, you really have to forget about looking at lines of code.
Right.
Because the real battles today are being fought with um, like a microscopic laser in the Netherlands, this incredibly aggressive accounting loophole in San Francisco, and a completely silent geopolitical standoff inside the White House.
Yeah, it's a total illusion that artificial intelligence is just, software floating in the cloud somewhere.
Yeah.
It's arguably the most fiercely contested physical and financial supply chain in human history. I mean, every time you type a prompt, you are interacting with the endpoint of a massive multi-trillion-dollar chess game.
And today, we are going to look straight down at the board. Welcome to the deep dive. We're getting into Aaron Rose's Tech Reader AI Digest for April 15th, 2026.
Hmm.
And the goal here isn't just to list off today's headlines. We really want to connect the dots between the corporate paranoia, the hardware physics, and the high-stakes trade diplomacy going on so you can see exactly how the foundations of this entire industry are being rewired right under our feet.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start at the software layer because a massive internal proxy war just completely spilled out into the open.
Yeah, it really did.
On Sunday, Denise Dresser, who is the chief revenue officer over at OpenAI, sent this highly aggressive memo to her staff, and her target was Anthropic.
Wow.
Yeah, specifically, she is going after Anthropic's claimed $30 billion annual revenue run rate.
Which is, I mean, that's a massive number.
Dresser points out that Anthropic distributes its models heavily through cloud partners, like AWS and Google Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Under their accounting interpretation, when a customer uses Claude through AWS, Anthropic counts the absolute total amount billed to that customer as their own revenue.
They are claiming the gross.
Which is exactly the issue. Think about how a movie theater operates. Anthropic is essentially claiming the total box office gross for every single ticket sold.
Even though the theater takes a cut.
Right. Even though theater itself, which is AWS in this scenario, is keeping a massive percentage of that ticket price. Now, OpenAI operates entirely differently here.
Yeah.
They distribute primarily through Microsoft Azure, but OpenAI reports that revenue share on a strict net basis, so they only put the actual royalty check they receive from Microsoft onto their books.
So OpenAI is only counting the studio's actual cut after the theater takes its share.
Precisely.
And Dresser is doing the math and telling her staff, look, if you apply our strict net accounting to Anthropic,
Right.
their real run rate isn't $30 billion, it's $22 billion.
Right. And suddenly, Anthropic drops right behind OpenAI's publicly reported $24 billion run rate.
But the math is really only half the story here. What makes this memo explosive is the outright hostility.
Oh, yeah.
Dresser called Anthropic's entire corporate narrative a story built on fear.
Yeah.
She actively tore into their infrastructure, calling their compute strategy a strategic misstep.
Those are strong words.
Very. She highlighted how Anthropic is heavily throttling customers, meaning they restrict how many prompts a user can run because they physically just don't have the compute power to process them all.
Right, because if you don't have enough GPUs to handle the batch processing during peak hours, you basically have to throttle your users or the whole system crashes.
Exactly.
Dresser even went so far as to call Anthropic a single product company in a platform war.
Ouch.
Yeah, mocking their early focus on cooking tools. That is just a brutal assessment of your biggest rival.
It is brutal, but you really have to look at the financial timeline that's driving this hostility right now.
Yeah.
The open secret in Silicon Valley is that both of these companies are prepping for initial public offerings in late 2026.
Right.
And when you file an S1 to go public, valuation multiples dictate your entire existence. The difference between a $22 billion run rate and a $30 billion run rate isn't just, bragging rights.
No, it's massive.
It is tens of billions of dollars in public market capitalization. That gross versus net accounting distinction is going to be scrutinized by every single institutional investor on Wall Street.
I get that, but I have to call out the glaring contradiction here.
Okay, what's that?
If OpenAI is actually leading the pack with $24 billion in real net revenue, why is their chief revenue officer spending her Sunday drafting a fiery defensive memo to convince her own staff that they are winning?
I mean, that is the ultimate tell, isn't it?
Yeah.
Aaron Rose points this out perfectly in the digest.
Yeah.
When executive leadership feels the need to explicitly tell their employees to stop worrying about a competitor, it is almost always because leadership is absolutely terrified of that competitor. You do not fire off a Sunday memo about accounting discrepancies if you feel totally secure in your market dominance. The anxiety is the real message here.
And the irony is, while these two startup giants are fighting over their IPO narratives, the actual enterprise market is just happily building without them.
Yeah, they are.
Jamie Dimon released his JP Morgan shareholder letter today, and he explicitly confirmed they are testing the Mythos model for real-world cyber capabilities.
Which is a huge signal.
Right.
Diamond noted that AI has definitively escalated security risks, but he is already deploying models to actively hunt those vulnerabilities down.
Right.
It proves that the banking sector isn't waiting around to see who wins the gross versus net PR battle. They are deploying whatever works today.
But here's the reality check. Whether Diamond is deploying Mythos or OpenAI and Anthropic are fighting over run rates, none of that happens without the physical hardware processing the math.
No, it doesn't.
You can argue about software revenue all day, but software is just a ghost without a machine. And the company making the machines that make the chips just shattered everyone's expectations.
Yeah, we are shifting gears to the Netherlands now. ASML just reported their Q1 2026 earnings, and the numbers are staggering.
Absolutely staggering. Total net sales of 8.8 billion euros, a massive 53% gross margin, and they raised their full-year guidance to an unbelievable 36 to 40 billion euros.
It's wild.
They are the sole global supplier of EUV lithography machines. Literally the only company on Earth that makes the printers capable of creating modern AI chips.
Right.
But the financial numbers aren't even the real story here. The critical update is that ASML just confirmed they shipped their second full High-NA EUV system to a lead customer. And the entire industry understands this customer is Intel.
And this is a massive leap in physics.
Yeah.
The digest specifies this as a 0.55 numerical aperture system. We really need to unpack the mechanics of what that actually means, because it changes the ceiling of what AI can even do.
Right. Let's break down the 0.55 NA. For years, people used the analogy that printing chips was like drawing a complex maze and we were running out of room because our markers were just too fat. But it's not really about markers, it's about light. To make a chip, you are bouncing extreme ultraviolet light off a series of highly complex mirrors to etch microscopic patterns onto a silicon wafer.
Exactly. And the problem chip makers hit is diffraction. When you try to etch patterns that are unimaginably small, like the upcoming 2-nanometer or 1.4 nanometer nodes, the light waves naturally want to spread out and blur.
Right, they won't stay sharp.
Yeah, you lose the sharpness of the pattern. So numerical aperture is simply the measure of how wide a range of angles a lens system can collect and focus that light.
So upgrading to a 0.55 numerical aperture means ASML has engineered a vastly wider, vastly more precise lens system.
Yes.
It can take that extreme ultraviolet light and force it into an incredibly steep, tight focal point. It literally stops the light from blurring. This is the exact fundamental physics breakthrough required to build the hardware for the Vera Rubin and 14A era. We are talking about architectures that will make today's Blackwell chips look like, I don't know, pocket calculators.
And here is why this specific shipment matters today. ASML CEO Christophe Fouquet flat out stated, chip demand is outpacing supply, period.
Wow.
Every week, there's a new pundit claiming the AI bubble is about to pop. But you really have to look at the timeline of a high-NA EUV machine. When Intel receives this massive multi-story piece of equipment, it takes months just to assemble it.
Right.
And then years to calibrate it inside a fabrication plant.
So this machine won't be churning out commercial chips until, what, 2027 or maybe 2028?
Precisely. This means Intel and the rest of the semiconductor industry aren't just placing bets on today's AI hype. They are locking in multi-billion-dollar capital expenditures based on the absolute certainty that demand will be astronomically higher 2 years from now.
That's a huge commitment.
It is. A backlog driven by multi-year physical infrastructure investment is the exact opposite of a software bubble.
But even if ASML has solved the physics of printing the chips and Intel gets these foundries running, you still have a massive vulnerability because a naked processor can't run an AI model by itself. It needs memory to feed it data. And that vulnerability is exactly what Washington is weaponizing right now.
Which brings us to the most delicate part of today's digest. If the demand is guaranteed, the next bottleneck isn't physics, it's geography and trade policies.
Yeah.
The White House currently has the Phase 2 Semiconductor Tariff Report sitting directly on the president's desk. This covers 90 days of intense trade reviews regarding Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan.
Right.
But instead of an announcement, there is just total strategic silence.
And silence at this level of geopolitics is basically a weapon. Now, just reporting neutrally here on what Reuters is saying, the administration is holding this report back because they are deep in negotiations over something called HBM reciprocity credits.
Hmm.
If you aren't deep into hardware architecture, HBM stands for high bandwidth memory. Why is that specific type of memory so critical to this standoff?
Because it is the ultimate bottleneck for artificial intelligence.
Okay.
If a GPU like an NVIDIA H100 or a Blackwell chip is the brain doing the raw math, the HBM is the nervous system feeding it information.
Okay, that makes sense.
Normal computer memory is flat, sort of like a sprawling suburb. It takes too long for the data to travel across the motherboard to the processor. But HBM literally stacks memory chips vertically like a skyscraper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it punches microscopic holes straight down through the floor so the data travels instantly. You simply cannot run a massive AI model without it.
And the catch is, the vast majority of that HBM skyscraper construction, the manufacturing and the highly complex packaging happens overseas.
Right.
It is entirely dominated by South Korean giants like Samsung and SK Hynix. So Washington is looking at this bottleneck and saying, look, we are going to apply a massive tariff on all of this imported memory.
And analysts project that if these standard tariffs hit, the total cost of an NVIDIA AI system could spike by 15%.
Which would be devastating, right?
Oh, it would send shockwaves through the entire global tech economy.
Oh.
A 15% hardware spike would instantly stall data center buildouts worldwide. But the administration isn't actually trying to crash the market.
Right.
They are using the threat of that 15% spike to introduce these reciprocity credits.
This is where the leverage comes in. Washington is essentially telling Samsung and SK Hynix, we will completely exempt your memory chips from these devastating tariffs, but only if you physically relocate a meaningful percentage of your HBM packaging operations onto United States soil.
It is an incredibly aggressive negotiation tactic. Moving a packaging facility isn't like moving a warehouse. You were talking about relocating ultra-clean rooms, hyper-specialized machinery, and thousands of highly trained engineers.
Yeah, it's massive.
But if the U.S. pulls this off, they accomplish two things. They protect NVIDIA's supply chain from a catastrophic price shock, and they successfully force foreign tech giants to build domestic manufacturing hubs in America.
It's basically a geopolitical masterclass in using tariffs not as a tax on the consumer, but as a hostage negotiation to physically reorganize the global supply chain.
Absolutely.
The stock market is completely paralyzed by this today, by the way. NVIDIA and AMD both closed essentially flat. No one wants to make a move until they know if South Korea blinks or if the White House drops the hammer.
It perfectly illustrates the fragility we were talking about earlier. You can have OpenAI's incredible models, and you can have ASML's miraculous lasers. But if memory packaging gets caught in a diplomatic crossfire, the data centers just can't get built.
Exactly. The hardware bottlenecks are terrifying if you are an AI company relying entirely on massive scale. Which brings us right back to Anthropic. Because while OpenAI is attacking Anthropic's single product focus and obsessing over compute volume in their Sunday memos, Anthropic seems to be quietly infiltrating the highest levels of specific lucrative industries.
Yeah, Anthropic is playing a completely different enterprise game here. Today, they announced the appointment of Vas Narasimhan to the board of directors of their long-term benefit trust.
Okay.
And for context, Vas Narasimhan is the CEO of Novartis, which is one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies on the planet.
And if you connect this board appointment to the news from last week that Anthropic just acquired Coefficient Bio, the strategy becomes crystal clear.
It really does.
Anthropic is optimizing its flagship model, Claude, to become the absolute trusted AI orchestrator for the pharmaceutical and life sciences sector.
Right.
But why choose pharma? Like, why not go after search or social media?
Because pharmaceuticals represent one of the most heavily regulated, highest value verticals in the global economy. I mean, bringing a single new drug to market costs billions of dollars and takes a decade.
Yeah.
Think about the mechanics of clinical trials. You are dealing with tens of thousands of pages of complex biological data, adverse reaction logs, and strict FDA compliance protocols. You simply cannot use an AI model that hallucinates.
Right. You can't just have a chatbot casually invent a fake side effect in a clinical trial document. The liability would be insane.
Exactly. And Claude is specifically architected for this. It has a massive context window, meaning it can ingest an entire drug trial's history at once without forgetting the beginning of the document.
Right.
Combine that with rigorous instruction tuning designed specifically to extract facts rather than invent creative answers, and Claude becomes incredibly reliable for regulatory compliance.
The value proposition there is practically infinite. Anthropic is looking at the landscape and deciding they don't need to win the consumer chatbot war against OpenAI.
Yo.
If Claude becomes the default, deeply embedded operating system for Novartis, Pfizer, and the entire life sciences industry, they own an impenetrable, incredibly lucrative monopoly.
It is the ultimate enterprise mode. And by placing the CEO of Novartis directly onto their governance board, Anthropic is sending a massive signal to other heavily regulated industries like banking, aerospace, and defense.
Yeah.
They are proving that they take compliance, safety, and data security seriously enough to let industry titans oversee their corporate trust structure.
It is brilliant, quiet maneuvering while their rivals are just shouting in the press.
It really is.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to highlight 2 quick dates from the digest that you absolutely need to circle on your calendar.
Okay.
First, the open source community is holding its breath because DeepSeek V4 still has a mid to late April release window. It hasn't dropped yet, but everyone is bracing for how it might disrupt the pricing models of these closed source giants we've been talking about.
It's the absolute wild card in the deck right now. If DeepSeek V4 can match OpenAI's reasoning capabilities for a fraction of the inference cost, the entire run rate debate we started the show with could be rendered obsolete overnight.
Exactly. And second, the courtroom drama is about to officially begin. Jury selection for the Elon Musk versus OpenAI trial kicks off on April 27th.
Oh, wow.
That is just 12 days away. Expect the discovery documents in that trial to leak like a sieve, and the headlines are going to get very loud very fast.
It's going to be quite a spectacle. But if we step back and synthesize everything we've explored today, the sheer scale of this industry on a random Wednesday in April is just staggering.
It really is. I mean, we started by looking at corporate ledgers and the aggressive accounting mechanics of gross versus net revenue.
Yeah.
Then we moved to a clean room in the Netherlands to explore the advanced physics of focusing extreme ultraviolet light to bypass the limits of diffraction. We watched the White House use the threat of a 15% cost spike to try and force vertical memory packaging operations out of Asia and into the U.S., and we finished with a strategic corporate board appointment designed to quietly capture the global pharmaceutical market.
It forces you to reconsider how we view this entire technology. We spend so much time marveling at how smart AI models are getting, the brilliant essays, the perfect code, the reasoning test scores. But look at the human fragility of the ecosystem supporting it all. The future of global intelligence currently relies on defensive accounting loopholes, holding up valuations. It relies on a single type of impossibly complex laser built in one town in the Netherlands. And it relies on last-minute, completely silent diplomatic negotiations over memory chips. It leaves you with a really haunting question to mull over.
What's that?
What happens to the AI revolution if just one of those highly precarious physical or political pillars gives way?
Wow. That is the exact question every tech executive is losing sleep over tonight, because the magic trick only works if the stage doesn't collapse.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Just a quick reminder before you go, TSMC, the foundry that actually takes those ASML machines and prints the chips, drops their earnings tonight at 2:00 a.m. Eastern.
That's going to be a big one.
It really is. That report is going to reveal the very next piece of this massive physical puzzle, and you will not want to miss what it signals for the rest of the year. Keep your eyes open, and we will see you next time.